The Mapping of Mental Illness to Buddhist Defilements by Venerable Rung Ruang Papas Saro, Dr. Rung Ruang Lim Chupatipa. Those who suffer in the mental illness, all of them are struggling with unwholesome thinking in some ways or another. All mental illness are due to the dysfunction of mind processing, either the perception or the way to respond to the object of consciousness. Moreover, the content of thought that the mind cling on the story will determine the symptoms of the type of particular mental illness. In this section, we will investigate on the dysfunction of each type of mental illness from Buddhist perspective, so that we can have a better understanding and then develop a specific solution to resolve each type of problem, including depression disorder, anxiety disorders, obsession-compulsive disorder, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, dissociative disorders, bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and psychosis as follows. Analysis on depression disorder. This is a kind of unwholesome thought of depression of the 5 lower fetters when the mind loops around some kind of painful event in the past again and again. Naturally, an object of consciousness arises and fades away, but in this situation the mind keeps on regenerating such that painful matter in thinking. While this dysfunction of mind processing is going on, the mind is lack of concentration, loss of energy, lack of interest in other activities, hopeless with guilty thoughts, and eventually busting on suicidal thoughts. Analysis on anxiety disorders. This is a kind of unwholesome thought of anxiety of the 5 lower fetters. Due to the feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome in the future. In this situation, the mind overreacts to the threat with worst-case scenario, causing the mind to be nervous and worried on dangers that may happen in the future. Typically, a person will express emotional symptoms with feelings of apprehension or dread, feeling tense or jumpy, become restlessness or irritability with surrounding conditions, and anticipating the worst and being watchful for signs of danger with sweating, tremors, twitches, headaches, fatigue and insomnia. The main contrast between depression and anxiety is that in case of depression of repeated thinking of something in the past for many times, the mind will get tired of thinking, then the mind will become apathetic torpor, while in the case of anxiety of repeated thinking of something that may happen in the future for many times, the mind will become excited. From Buddhist perspective, both the depression and anxiety are the 5 lower fetters that are originated from the finest defilements in the first round of the process of dependent origination. Memory of painful experience is retrieved to be executed in volitional formations with desire and lust. The matters of the past cause depression, while the matters of the future cause anxiety. As the process of dependent origination proceeds in several rounds, the volitional formations aggravate the mental problem into suffering. The Buddha explained the problems of depression and anxiety, and then suggested the way to resolve the problem as follows.
One should neither run back into what happened in the past, nor be afraid of what is going to happen in the future. Whatsoever happened is already happened, and it arises and fades away. It is impossible to change the past. Whatsoever to happen in the future is dependently on a certain cause and effect. If do it right, then the outcome will be right as well. Especially at this moment, nothing is happening yet. What a depression and an anxiety are about, it is just an object of consciousness happening inside the mind. It is important to realize that whatsoever happening in the mind, it arises and eventually fades away. Those who established mindfulness in the present moment all day and night will have nothing to be worried about and to be afraid of. We should have mindfulness in the present moment because when the mind has received either a stimulus of external mental phenomenon from sense bases or an internal formulated mental phenomenon, if we do not think of whatsoever happened in the past or of whatsoever will happen in the future, and then the mind will not be bothered with any matter anymore. That is, we should not think of what happened in the past and do not run forward into the expectation of what will happen in the future, but we should firmly keep the mind to be steadied in the present moment only, then the mind will not be afraid of anything. And the mind will abandon the 5 aggregates subject to clinging.
By establishing mindfulness in the present moment, the mind will be resettled to the origin at the coordinate 0.0.0. That is, the mind will be at the neutral position with no sensual desire, no ill will, not to be involved with anything in the past or the future. Then the mind will be internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. This is a very smart way to abandon the object of consciousness. Analysis on obsessive-compulsive. This is a kind of unwholesome thought associated with sensual desire and ill will of the 5 lower fetters. When the mind fetches a stimulus from the world as an object of consciousness, a feeling arises. Commonly, there are two possibilities happening at the feeling, either to be pleased with the mental object or to be frustrated against the mental object. However, if the mind overreacts to such mental object, in case of positive pleasing situation, the mind will turn to be strong emotional feeling with love, crazy with passion, and in extreme case becoming obsession compulsive about harming or having harmed someone. On the other hand, in case of negative frustrating situation, the mind will turn to be angry, mad, and in extreme case becoming obsession compulsive with hatred. When dealing with emotion, there is a thin line crossing between a little bit too much and too bad. Generally, the mind will keep on processing its function like thinking, but if we let the mind to do without limitation, then it is dangerous. This is the reason why in Buddhism, we need to have mindfulness to monitor the mind conditions to address what is enough, and if possible, we should abandon these unwholesome of emotional feeling, such as greed or hatred, as soon as possible before it may become bursting out into serious problems. In order to resolve the obsessive-compulsive disorder, the Buddha suggested to contain the emotional feeling with proper dharma to counterbalance the arising unwholesome thought as follows.
When countering with any arising troubling thought, we should learn on how to maneuver the problem by having proper perception. That is, when encountering with something we like with desire and lust, then by establishing mindfulness with proper perception to view that as time passes by, aging will transform the beauty to be old. This is a way to contain and to abandon such an arising emotion of sensual pleasure. On the other hand, when encountering with something we dislike with desire for destruction, at this time then establishing mindfulness with proper perception to view that this non-beauty is just a part of natural processing by certain cause and effect. This is a way to contain and to abandon such an arising emotion of hatred. When encountering with strong emotional feeling, it is necessary to contain it with proper counterattack perception to subdue an arising emotional feeling, no matter we like it or dislike it. By doing so with the proper perception, the mind will be stabilized to be neutral against any kind of unwholesome thoughts by wisdom.
ADHD analysis on attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. Typically, the quality of how a mind can respond to an object of consciousness right or not depending on two capabilities, mindfulness and concentration. When the mind lacks the capability to concentrate on the object of consciousness, the mind will respond without full consideration and seems to be hyperactivity in responding to the world. In principle, when having consciousness, the mind will be able to give attention to the object of consciousness for a moment, so that the mind will be able to understand what the object of consciousness is about, and the mind will be able to respond to the world correctly. However, due to the problem of attention deficit, the mind will delay in making decision-making by distraction, and will not be able to make an immediate response rightly. As a consequence, the mind becomes bored with a task quickly, difficulty focusing attention or completing a single task or activity, not listening or paying attention when spoken to, daydreaming or wandering with lack of motivation, and difficulty processing information quickly. Sometimes, the mind will try to force the response with hyperactivity, impulsion, and impatience. When realizing that a person lacks an ability to pay attention, it is simply to resolve the problem by performing meditation to enhance the ability to be concentrated on the object of consciousness. However, we have to understand that there are two types of meditation, a mantra meditation and a mindfulness meditation. The mantra meditation is to force the mind to be concentrated by reciting a short sacred word again and again until the mind is concentrated, while the mindfulness meditation is to establish mindfulness to abandon any arising unwholesome thoughts. Then the mind is internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. The mindfulness meditation is the Buddhist way to perform the meditation for insight observation as follows.
I teach you on how to abandon any kind of arising unwholesomeness within the mind, because when the mind is unwholesomeness, then the mind will be struggling, non-internally steadied, restless typically with desire and lust. In addition, we have to pull out the mind from this trouble as soon as possible before it will burst out into action of wrongdoing. This can be done by having mindfulness with careful attention on something wholesome, in order to abandon that unwholesomeness, so that the mind will become internally steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated in peace. This is the way to keep the mind be wholesome at all times.
Analysis on bipolar disorder. This mental illness is similar to the attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, in the sense that in ADHD the mind randomly scatters a new activity around without any clear direction, while in a special case of bipolar disorder, the mind specifically switches a new activity into an opposite direction, and the abrupt change in behavior is so-called bipolar. That is, a person can also experience both extremes simultaneously or in rapid sequence. Severe bipolar episodes of mania or depression may include psychotic symptoms such as hallucinations or delusions. The bipolar disorder is a special case of attention deficit, when the mind abruptly swings to an opposite direction, changing the mood rapidly with no concentration. Therefore, the way to cure this bipolar disorder is to perform mindfulness meditation, not mantra meditation. Otherwise, the mind will be crashed with two opposite forces. An analysis on dissociative disorder. Generally, a human being will be associated with others in living, so-called social live. However, in a person who may have some bad experiences with others, fear within that person will remind of the bad experience and makes the person to be distanced and isolated from others. The dissociate disorder illness usually is associated with other illness such as depression, anxiety, and thoughts of suicide. In fact, the dissociation itself is not a problem, but while having some kind of mental problem such as depression or anxiety, or attention deficit and being far away from others is dangerous. The patient should seek for help from someone, and then performing mindfulness practice such as mindfulness breathing to be aware of what is happening around will be helpful to be associated with others in normal life. An analysis on PTSD. It occurs in people who had experienced or witnessed a traumatic event such as a natural disaster, a serious accident, a war act, rape, or something similar. This is a special case when a person experienced some serious event and need to reprogram the mindset to understand that there is no way to make change on what has happened in the past. It is no use to internally punish yourself, and life has to move forward. Learning the Dharma and performing Buddhist practice to understand the truth of life can be very useful. An analysis on psychosis. This mental illness is completely a self-delusion of something supernatural such as seeing something no one sees, hearing something no one hears, having trouble thinking clearly or concentrating, being persistent, unusual thoughts or beliefs that can't be set aside regardless of what others believe, thinking to have special powers, being on a special mission, or even that being superhero or God. This is an extreme case of delusion of rough defilement in Buddhism. It is a combination of several mental illness together, and we have to put an effort to resolve the problems one by one to bring a person back to real world. Again, learning the Dharma and performing Buddhist practice to understand the truth of life can be very useful. Detailed comprehensive Buddhist therapy will be introduced to resolve all kinds of mental illness. Life is a stream of consciousness. While being consciousness, the mind will fetch an object of consciousness with mindfulness to be aware of the object of consciousness, and focusing on the object of consciousness to fully understand of what the object is, respectively. Therefore, the quality of consciousness will depend on the quality of mindfulness and concentration as well. In case when there is a problem with mindfulness, the mind will lack the capability to be aware of what the mental object is about, then it let the mind repeat the process without warning, and as a result it causes mental problems like depression, or anxiety, or obsessive and impulsive disorder. In case when there is a problem with concentration, the mind will lack the capability to focus on the mental object, and rush out the response with no clear continuity. As a result, it causes mental problem like hyperactivity or bipolar disorder. However, in general case of having problem with both mindfulness and concentration, the problem will turn to be very complex with a combination of various mental illness.